Hi, I'm Hecpax. Last week we talked about articles 4 to 7 of the 13 principles of game design. This week, we will talk about 3 articles. The articles are pacing, space, and linear design versus component breakdown. So let's start. Pacing. When you're playing a game, the pace of events can greatly affect your experience. That's why game developers put a lot of effort into pacing their games effectively. Pacing in games refers to the rate at which events occur, the level of concentration required, and how often events are being repeated. Games with good pacing keep you engaged by providing a steady stream of challenges and rewards. They avoid becoming too repetitive or overwhelming, which can cause players to lose interest. To achieve the proper effect, game developers often use techniques like level design, enemy placement, and difficulty scaling. They also take into consideration the desired sense of urgency, whether it's a high-speed racing game or a slow-burning puzzle adventure. So, in conclusion, pacing is a crucial aspect of game design that can greatly affect the player's experience. By pacing their games effectively, developers can keep players engaged and entertained for hours on end. Example of a game with poor pacing is Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. This game suffered from pacing issues due to its open-world design. The game was too big and too open, with too many side missions and distractions that took away from the main story. The game also had a slow start, with long cutscenes and tutorials that didn't add much to the overall experience. Another example of a game with good pacing is Portal 2. This puzzle platformer game has a very deliberate and well-paced story that slowly reveals more about the game's world and characters as the player progresses. The game's puzzles start out simple and gradually become more complex, providing a sense of challenge and progression without overwhelming the player. The pacing is also well balanced with comedic moments and character interactions that keep the player engaged throughout the game. Additionally, the game's use of scripted events and pacing in the level design ensures that the player is always engaged in the game's story and puzzle-solving mechanics. So, how can game developers get pacing right? One key is to balance the difficulty of the game with the player's skill level. If a game is too difficult, it can become frustrating and cause players to lose interest. On the other hand, if a game is too easy, it can become boring and repetitive. Another key is to provide a sense of progression, whether it's through unlocking new abilities or exploring new environments. In conclusion, pacing is a crucial aspect of game design that can greatly affect the player's experience. By pacing their games effectively, developers can keep players engaged and entertained for hours on end. Space. When designing a game, it's important to consider the amount of space available both on-screen and in-world. This involves understanding the spatial relationship between different game elements and taking into account the impact of modifying these spaces. For instance, you want to make sure that there's enough spacing between the game's menu items and the character to prevent the player from accidentally selecting the wrong menu item. This can make the game experience more seamless and enjoyable. Similarly, the proper placement of characters and objects in a game world can have a significant impact on the overall experience. For example, in a shooter game, having targets placed too close together can make it harder for the player to aim and hit the correct target. In summary, spacing is a crucial aspect of game design that can greatly influence the player's experience. Proper spacing can make the game more intuitive and easy to navigate, while also increasing the player's sense of immersion. As you can see on the screen, spacing refers to understanding how much space is available both on-screen and in-world, recognizing the spatial relationship between elements, and taking into account the effects of modifying those spaces. Let's take Super Mario Bros. As an example. Throughout the game, the gaps between the platforms, blocks, and other objects that Mario moves on are carefully spaced. This makes Mario's movements smoother and reduces the likelihood of the player making mistakes. Another example is The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The game world is vast and filled with many different elements and characters. However, the game designers have ensured that each element and character is placed correctly, which prevents possible errors during player interactions with the world and makes the game experience more fluid. Lastly, in Overwatch, the spacing between the characters controlled by players and the design of the game area are crucial during gameplay. This allows players to aim accurately and be prepared for the opposing team's moves. Linear design versus component breakdown. Linear design approach is often used in game development to create games with well-defined gameplay mechanics and a clear vision from the outset. The process typically starts with pre-production, where the game concept is developed, gameplay mechanics are defined, and the game design document is created. This is followed by production, where the game is built according to the design document. The development team works on specific features or components of the game in a predetermined order, with each component being completed before moving on to the next one. The testing phase is carried out once the game is fully built, and any bugs or issues are fixed before release. On the other hand, component breakdown approach is often used in game development to create large and complex games with frequent updates and expansions. In this approach, the game is broken down into smaller, more manageable components or modules, such as gameplay mechanics, level design, art assets, sound effects, and user interface. Each component is developed and tested independently, and then integrated into the game as a whole. This approach allows for greater flexibility and easier maintenance, as changes can be made to individual components without affecting the rest of the game. It also allows for the creation of downloadable content and expansions, which can be easily added to the game over time. In conclusion, both linear design and component breakdown approaches have their own advantages and disadvantages in game development. The choice between the two depends on the scope of the game, the size of the development team, the desired release schedule, and the vision of the game. A linear design approach is suitable for smaller games with well-defined mechanics, while a component breakdown approach is suitable for larger games with more complex systems and frequent updates. Linear design approach is suitable for games such as platformers, where the game mechanics are clearly defined and each level is not significantly different from the previous one. Games like Mario Bros. Or Sonic the Hedgehog can be given as examples of this design approach. On the other hand, component breakdown approach is suitable for larger and more complex games such as open-world games. These types of games require the independent development of different components of the game, such as levels, missions, side quests, characters, etc., and then integration of these components into the whole game. Games like Grand Theft Auto or the Elder Scrolls series can be given as examples of this approach. Since both approaches have different advantages, some games may use a combination of both. For example, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is an open-world game, but it has predetermined levels with specific tasks, which use the linear design approach, while the open-world component uses the component breakdown approach. That's it for this week's video. Sorry the video took a little long. Thanks for watching. See you soon.